Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum. On this Sunday, May the 15th, we're doing a remix, the Resurrection of the Body remix. And we've invited Pastor Steve to join us for this conversation. I've run out of ideas, Pastor Steve, so I'm going to hand the ball then to you.
He's making me nervous. You're going to make me into the Bible answer man. I always tell people I'm not the Bible answer man, but we'll proceed anyway.
Now, here's why we're doing this, is that something unique happened at the Sunday Forum, Pastor Steve.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, we were having this conversation about the resurrection of the body, and there are a lot of topics. The immortality of the soul. Right. Does the body improve in the resurrection? At what age am I resurrected? Does it happen immediately to the end times when the trumpet blows? All these questions. Will I recognize my parents in heaven? And so we were not done that conversation, and people came up and said, you've got to continue the conversation. I said, great, Pastor Steve will do it.
And that's the fallacy. We will still not be done at the end of this conversation.
So we want to pick up, as a catalyst for the conversation on Sunday, a few of the topics. We can't touch on all of them, but a few of them. And we invite you then, of course, to come on Sunday at 10:15, where you can get your personal questions in and have a wonderful, rich discussion here at Emmanuel. But let me start with this first question. When it comes to the resurrection of the body, you've done so many funerals here at Emmanuel over the years, and of course before that. When you're doing funerals or when you're meeting with families before or after the funerals, how do you talk about this topic?
Well, you know, I said to myself when you kind of alluded we'd be talking about that, I really never have found real detailed conversation where people were pressing as much as they seem to be pressing here. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just from the standpoint that when you put a group together and start asking these questions, it kind of primes the pump, you know. The funeral is, when you prepare for a funeral, and I've done many from, you know, children that have died in infancy to people that have been way up in age. I look at the funeral service and I always realize that we kind of move through a understanding initially that we're dealing with a very unique person here, created in the image of God. So we try to celebrate that in a funeral setting, to lift up that person. And then we kind of also say, but you know, that's not the last word. There's another word here, and that is the word of Christ. So I'm always saying, let's trust Jesus on this. So we welcome Jesus into the presence. I look at some of the funeral liturgy here. We even go back and we remember that Paul said these bold statements that if you've been baptized into Christ, you're baptized into his death and his resurrection. And then in the liturgy, there's, you know, in the opening prayer, it says, in your boundless compassion, console us, give us faith that death has been swallowed up in the victory, and confidence and hope. So in that regard, I think when you do as you've been doing and get into some of these details of what is that like, the funeral service doesn't really answer that. But it does lift up this commendation into the mystery of God's promise that where I am, you will be also.
Now, I think it's probably true that most of us, I'm sure this is the case for you, have some favorite Bible stories or texts that we go to, you go to for comfort at these times. They don't answer all the questions, as you said, but I mentioned this before, Luke 24, where Jesus eats fish. For some reason, I find that so comforting, you know, that, there's going to be a banquet, a real banquet in heaven. The body matters, food matters. That's a comfort to me. Do you have any resurrection stories, kind of these Easter stories that we review now during the 50 days of Easter, that you find comforting?
Well, you know, I've admitted on some occasions that, you know, I also have had struggles with faith along the way. It was a big surprise, right? Don't we all? But so I do like the Thomas story that comes right after the Resurrection Sunday. I think it brings some reality into what was going on in the lives of the disciples, that they were so distraught from what their experience was of falling away, and like they had abandoned Christ, that they must have thought that, you know, in some regards, I wouldn't blame him if he abandoned us. But he comes back, and when Jesus comes back and he deals with Thomas, there was kind of a tenderness there, I think, where he drew Thomas back in from disbelief to belief. And I think all of us have to kind of rely upon that. I also, Rick, you know, in recent days, I've used the great I am stories to wrap people around these promises of Christ. So when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, I take his word for that.
Now, I have to add that my son liked the resurrection appearances of Jesus walking through walls to see his disciples. For him, those were superpowers when he was younger. That's what gave him comfort in the resurrection. I can walk through, I will be able to walk through walls. We didn't just hear stories, biblical stories, to give comfort on Sunday, but during the week also, we heard stories of people experiencing appearances in their lives, where grandma would come back, or grandpa, or a loved one, or a spouse would actually appear, or maybe even an angel. Now, have you heard stories like that in the past as well?
I was actually in a hospital room at midnight. It was around the midnight hour. I'm not saying that to make it more dramatic, but that a woman was dying, and she looked right ahead and said, do you see him? Do you see her? Him, her, I don't remember her, but she saw an angel visitant in the hospital room. And I was by the bedside, and I wasn't going to argue with her. I said, yes, I know. I just stood in awe. And her husband was in the room as well. And I recall that when after that vision that she had, there was something about her that she had some peace and comfort, and she was calm. So who was I to say that I didn't see it when she did?
My guess is that many of our people here at Emmanuel have had similar experiences, and we'll invite you, if you so desire, to share those stories, because often they leave one with comfort, right?
Absolutely.
The loved one came back. I know with my wife, when we were in Germany, she got up suddenly, and her grandfather had appeared to her. She knew something was wrong, and it so happened he had died the night before in the United States. We didn't know. And so how do you explain those things? Well, one way you can't, but the Bible has all these stories too of visions and appearances. And so they build that all into the gospel message. My mother always wanted to see an angel because she had heard these stories. She said, God, I want to, she'd pray, and that was one prayer that did not get answered positively. She just wanted to see an angel.
Well, you know, I always, in 1 Corinthians 15, I love the phrase when Paul says, behold, I tell you a mystery. I see that mystery wrapping around all of this about, you know, death, life, new life. And I think it's fascinating, since you're having this type of open discussion. It's one of the first times you've had a group of people, we've had a group of people together telling these stories. Because I think a lot of people kind of hold those off to the side and say, I'm not sure if I want to talk about that. But when others are talking about it, there's kind of an array of
especially not in the church. I'm afraid maybe I'm a heretic or something.
That's right.
Last question. You know, we did talk about the immortality of the soul. There are different opinions about that. But really, when I thought about it this week, there's different language we use to describe a human person. Like the Hebrew tradition was to talk about the body and the soul. But the Greek tradition that we also see in the New Testament used three parts of the human, right? Body, soul, and spirit. And so I'm wondering, as you've done funerals, as you've talked to people, as you've read the New Testament and the Old Testament, what two-part, three-part? I mean, how do you talk about the human?
Well, I would probably jump to Romans chapter 8 that talks about God makes a whole new creation. In other words, even speaks about the world that's crying out in pain. You know, I would say, you know, when I say the world, you know, you can see where the world right now is dying. You know, when you talk about all the things of the ecology itself. And in Romans it talks about not only will God restore all of humanity to new creation, but we'll do it as well with the world around us. I think that's a fascinating thing. So you're asking maybe a deeper question again about how it all stays together or whether it's dissected. I like to think Christ keeps everything together, and we'll have to talk more about that on Sunday. But I don't like to think of everything being split up. I think there's more of a unification that I would look to.
And I think Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, again, we want to point you to those stories. Again, Paul finally ends with a doxology. He says, you know, Jesus has committed to the creation and to this recreation. And whether we have 2 parts or 3 parts or maybe 20 parts, things have gotten more complicated as we look at the stars and when we look internally too. We're complex. And yet, God is committed to recreating you and me, to his creation, to the body, the soul, the spirit, however we're made up. And I think there's a lot of good news there.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you finally take these great I ams that I talked about yesterday, being the good shepherd, and Jesus says to his disciples, be not afraid, in my Father's house there are many mansions. I've always thought there's room for everybody here, but I've always liked the part there he gets kind of personal and says, I will come again and I will take you to myself, that where I am you may be also. At that point I'm going to trust Jesus.
And with that, I think it's a great way to close our Sunday Forum. Again, join us Sunday. Join Pastor Steve.
I look forward to it.
Come with your stories on Sunday as we talk once again about the resurrection of the body, the remix. Thanks for joining us on the Sunday Forum. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and I will see you all on Sunday. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.